This episode is brought to you by Blueprint Health. Blueprint Health is a measurement-based care platform for mental health providers. You can find out more about them by going to practiceoftherapy.com/blueprinthealth. And also this episode is brought to you by TherapyNotes, therapynotes.com, the leading electronic health record system for mental health providers in private practice. They're who I use in my practice. Check them out at practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. This is the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, helping you to navigate your private practice journey. This is episode number 198 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Hello, folks. I'm Gordon Brewer. Glad you've joined me. Glad you're listening in to the podcast. And if you're here for the first time, glad you found us. Glad you stumbled upon us, and hope you will take time to follow us wherever you might be listening to the podcast. So I've got my guest today, and he probably needs no introduction. For any of you that have been listening to podcasts in this whole private practice space, most of you probably know my good friend Joe Sanok. And Joe has been such an inspiration for me. And over the last several years, he's been not only a mentor, but I consider him a colleague, and just all that we do to provide resources for those folks that are in private practice. And if you don't know Joe Sanok, he's the person behind Practice of the Practice. And it's probably the top private practice podcast out there, but he's just got just a ton of resources now and just a really wonderful team. He's really built quite, I don't want to sound too presumptuous, but quite the empire with what he's doing. But Joe is a great person and a good friend, and I'm excited for Joe because he has got a new book, and it's a traditional book, and it is being published by HarperCollins, which is pretty impressive to me. But his new book is called Thursday is the New Friday, and so in this particular episode, Joe's going to take us into Thursday is the New Friday, and just some of the stuff and the research that he's done on productivity and being able to kind of rethink how we organize our lives, which I think is just great information to have, and something that I think a lot about because, as I've shared in previous episodes, I've been going through a lot of ups and downs with my wife and the fact that she's disabled. And so I've had to reorganize my life in quite a different way now. And so anyway, this book has been a big help to me, and it's a wonderful book. So we'll get to Joe here in a minute, and you can listen into our conversation about Thursday is the New Friday and his launch of this book that's coming out here this week as we put out this particular episode. And also, Joe and I are going to talk a little bit about Killing It Camp that's coming up later this month. And so you can find out about that by going to practiceoftherapy.com KIC 2021, and that'll get you to the landing page where you can find out how to sign up for that. It's going to be a virtual conference on October the 14th and 15th, I believe it is, or 15th and 16th. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, you can find out more about that by going to practiceoftherapy.com /KIC 2021. And also, I think this is going to be, don't quote me on this. This is going to be the last week of the pre-launch of the Using Google Workspace as a Practice Platform course. I've got it pretty much finished now and putting a few little, doing some of the trim work, as I like to call it, on the course. And so it's going to be ready for full launch here in the next week or two. But take advantage of the early bird pricing. And when you enroll in the course, you get lifetime access. So any updates that I've added to the course, you can get those as well. But the course goes over how to use the different tools of Google Workspace in your practice as kind of a practice management system. And so in this course, it really piggybacks on my other course, just Google Workspace for Therapists, which that course has been out for some time now and recently updated that here in 2021. But Google Workspace as a practice platform will just go in deeper with that. And I partner with my friend Ed Dara on the course, and he just adds a lot because he's a person that uses pretty much Google Workspace exclusively in his practice. I use a combination. I actually use Google Workspace along with TherapyNotes in my practice. TherapyNotes handles kind of the clinical side of things, and Google Workspace handles the business side of things. And there is some overlap there, and I talk about that in the course. So be sure and check it out and take advantage of the early bird pricing. So you can get to that by going to practiceoftherapy.com/GWS platform. And you can find out more about that and enroll and get lifetime access. And also, before we get to Joe, I'd love for you to hear from our sponsors, Blueprint Health and TherapyNotes. They are two wonderful sponsors of the podcast, and I'm so glad they are because they allow me to be able to put the podcast out week after week and be able to put all this free content out there for you to listen to. So be sure and check them out. And here's a few words from those two sponsors. You know, as your practice grows, the systems and processes you have in place will keep your practice running smoothly. That's why it's important to have an electronic health record system that is specific to mental health providers. TherapyNotes is a complete practice management system with everything you need to manage patient records, schedule appointments, meet with patients remotely, create rich documentation, and bill insurance, all right at your fingertips. Their streamlined software is accessible wherever and whenever you need it. They're who I use in my practice. And did I mention that they are one of the top-rated EHRs for mental health providers? Their support is also second to none. So be sure to check them out at practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. And be sure to use the promo code Gordon, just GORDON, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. That's therapynotes.com. And this episode is also brought to you by Blueprint Health. You know, one of the best ways to serve clients in your practice is through measurement-based outcomes. In fact, more and more third-party payers, aka insurance companies, are demanding measurable outcomes. And with more and more emphasis on good mental health, having a way to measure your outcomes just makes sense. Introducing Blueprint, the measurement-based care platform that administers, scores, and charts hundreds of symptom rating scales to give clinicians deeper insights into treatment progress. Ultimately, by helping behavioral health providers to grow top-line practice revenue, increase clinician satisfaction, and deliver more effective care. So be sure and check them out by going to practiceoftherapy.com/blueprint health. And by going to that URL, you can also get your first month free. Again, that's practiceoftherapy.com/blueprint health. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the Practice of Therapy podcast. And I've got the one and only Joe Sanok from Practice of the Practice. And Joe, glad to have you back. It's always good to have you here. And I'm so excited for Joe to introduce to you his new book. And this has been a little bit coming, and I've kind of I've heard a good bit of the backstory around how you put this book together and all of that. But tell folks about yourself. And for those that might not know you, that would be hard for me to believe. But anyway, for folks that don't know about you, tell them a little bit about yourself and the book.
Yeah, my quick backstory is I took a very traditional approach to entering the therapy world. I was raised by a school psychologist and a school nurse. So my whole life I was told if you do well in school, someone will hire you. So I did well in school because I wanted to get hired. And so I got my undergraduate degree in psychology and comparative religion, then did a double master's degree in counseling and psychology, and entered the workforce in nonprofits, community mental health, was a foster care supervisor, and eventually got an amazing job at a community college. It was kind of the golden handcuffs where it was one of the higher paying full-time jobs in the area, a pension, all sorts of like life insurance and health insurance, all those things that in the nonprofit world, you don't always get. And as I was doing that, I had this side counseling practice that was really to pay off student loan debt. And in that process, I was reading books about business because I know, Gordon, you probably know this too, that in grad school, they don't teach us anything about business.
Right.
So I didn't even have a business class in college at all. And so I was learning these books from these books or podcasts and applying it to private practice. And in 2012, launched the Practice podcast to talk about basically what I was learning, to be a co-learner and say, yeah, I'm like 2 steps ahead of all of you. I'm reading these books. Here's how I'm applying it. But then over time, started doing more consulting and mastermind groups and hosting conferences, and eventually started membership communities. And now with Practice the Practice, we have a membership community for every single phase of practice. From the second you say to yourself, you know what, I really want to start a private practice, all the way to I want to make my first hire. We have group practice launch. And then after that, we have group practice boss. And so at every phase, we've got a membership community for people now. But then in 2018, at the end of it, I said, what's that next really big step for me? Every year or two, I take that advice from the book, The One Thing, of what's that one thing that if I do that, it's going to make everything else easier. And to me, it was having a traditionally published book through a traditional publisher and a New York Times bestseller. So if I do that, then that's going to make things easier. And so started down that process and said, well, what do I need to do first? And so, I had to find an agent and then a writing coach for the proposal, get that proposal shopped around, and then write the book and all those steps. And so for me, that process really allowed me to dig deep into the subject of what do I believe and teach all the time, and really to land on working fewer hours, but playing super big is something that I've just taught over and over to say, I want you to do your most efficient, creative, and productive work, but I don't want you to do it at the sake of your family not having you around.
Right. And that's I know Joe and I were talking about this before we started recording, just about, kind of ups and downs of family life. I know we've both kind of gone through some transitions here lately and that sort of thing. And, one of the things I love about the book is that it really encompasses how to think about the way you do your work in a different way. It's not to be too cliche, but we're really learning how to work much smarter rather than harder, because it's I know the book covers just the importance of downtime, and slowing down is a big part of being more productive, but also having those times when you really hustle and do those sprints and that sort of thing. You want to say more about all that, Joe? I know this is I know just throwing this nugget to him, this is going to be stuff he's really excited about.
Well, whenever I approach, a project or a podcast or any sort of subject, I want to know the backstory, because if we don't understand how we got here, it's really hard to know where we're headed. And so once I got the book deal, I wanted to just start from scratch and say, when I think about the 4-day work week, what to me stands out? If I was starting from scratch without having done this whole book proposal, what would the questions be that I have? And so right away I started thinking, well, wait, the 7-day week, where did that come from? The 40-hour work week, where did that come from? How do we understand just this concept of time to begin with? Because, a year makes sense. It's when the earth goes around the sun. And a day makes sense. It's how long it takes it to spin. But the 7-day week just didn't make sense to me. So I looked into that. And it was actually the Babylonians, over 4,000 years ago, that when they looked up in the sky, they saw 7 major things. They saw the sun, the moon, Earth, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Jupiter. So those were the 7 that they saw. And they said, you know what? We should have a 7-day week. As a result of that, we also saw that the Romans had a 10-day week and the Egyptians, they had an 8-day week. And so what often happens is we think that this 7-day week is just how it is, but we just as well could have had a 5-day week and had 73 of them in a year. And so let's just start with, we made this up. We made up the 7-day week. So fast forward to the late 1800s, early 1900s. The average person was working 10 to 14 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week. There were protests in the late 1800s around this, wanting a 40-hour work week, especially in Chicago when they were rebuilding Chicago after the fires. These people had moved from Europe to live a better life and were working harder in the United States. There's actually such a protest, and this is actually where we get May Day, was that there was such a protest in the Haymarket area of Chicago that there was a national lockdown because they were scared that these protests and the uprising would spread. And so it wasn't until 40 years later in 1926, on May Day of 1926, so 40 years exactly, that Henry Ford says, I'm going to start the 40-hour work week within Ford. And so for humanity, that was a huge step forward. But the reality was Henry Ford wanted to sell more cars. He said that his people were not going to buy a car just to get to work faster. But if they had a weekend, if they had something to look forward to, if they wanted to more quickly go visit their friends and their family or go for hikes or whatever they wanted to do, they would buy a car. So the industrialists gave us this model of how to view the world, that you view people like machines, that you have a certain structure, that we view life as an assembly line. We still see lots of leftovers of that in our school systems, in the way we view work. But if we can name that, that's an industrialist way of thinking. That's too linear for how we are now. We understand nuance. We don't look at people like machines anymore. And so then we can start to deconstruct how we view time now. So the 7-day week, we made it up. 40-hour work week, less than 100 years old. We are the post-pandemic generation that gets to say, do we want to do work the way we used to, or are we going to recreate something new?
Right. I love that. It's funny. I'm kind of laughing to myself. My wife and I have been in the process of rewatching Downton Abbey, and there was a line in there by the Dowager Countess, played by Maggie Smith, where somebody was talking about a weekend, and she says, "Well, what's a weekend?" Right. It's just, yeah. And so it's just, it's funny how we get locked into the constructs of things, and it's, not to get too far off, but one of the things that I've been just kind of working on in my life is just really eating healthier and getting control of my weight and all of that kind of stuff. And one of the things too that same kind of thing is that 3 meals a day is, again, a construct, and just how we eat is, all comes from what has been constructed in the last 100 years, as opposed to, why do we do these things? So yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And I think even just that idea of listening to our bodies to understand. And so even, in the mornings, I've been starting with green tea, and then I have this kind of healthier bulletproof smoothie kind of thing that has some greens in it and a lot of seeds in it. And so I still get my coffee, but it's a healthier version of it. And mid-afternoon, when I'm feeling hungry, I don't just go eat some Cheez-Its. Now I go, make a green smoothie and have a lot of the nutrients that will help my body. And when we do that, when we actually listen to our bodies, it's amazing how you realize maybe the ways that we were taught just aren't the ways we want moving forward. Right. I even think about Lucia and Lake and my 6 and 10-year-old. We did this 2-week road trip where we went to Death Valley, and then we went to Sequoia, Kings Canyon, Yosemite. We went over to Monterey and did whale watching. And so the 3 of us did this amazing kind of epic road trip. And I said to him at the beginning of this, I'm sick of fighting about food. On this trip, you can eat whatever you want, whenever you want it, as long as you listen to your body. Because, at a certain point as adults, we have to just decide how we're going to eat. I could eat ridiculously crappy food all the time as an adult. And to say to these kids that I'm going to be in charge of your diet, and then when you turn 18, like, you're in charge of it, that doesn't seem like how I want to teach them. And so there was one morning that Lakin, my 6-year-old, she had, it was a bunch of bacon and Pringles for breakfast. And she's like, my body feels great. And I'm like, oh my word. Like, what am I doing to these kids? Yeah. Another night she ate 3 bowls of goldfish. And she's laying in bed kind of shaking. And she goes, Daddy, I ate too many carbs.
Yeah.
But it's like she was learning. And then at the end of the trip, I remember I was grabbing a Starbucks and I said to the girls, you've had an amazing day. Would you like to have a cake pop? And they both said, you know what? Our bodies don't need a cake pop. I mean, a kid turning down a cake pop. But it was like this moment where, all the things that, whether I'm teaching it through Thursdays, the New Friday, or just living it, it's like we have control over our time, our food, how we construct meals, all of these things. We can take that back and say, what's healthiest for us? And then when we're living more in that health and in that slowing down, we can absolutely kill it when it's time to work on our businesses.
Right. So in the book, you want to tell folks a little about some of the principles that are in there that you kind of build on. And well, one of the things I love about the book is it's got some work pages and stuff in there too, and just ways in which you can kind of go through things.
Yeah, I really wanted to have a strong balance of what does the science say? What does research say? What are some practical applications, case studies, and stories of people living this out? But then what is the reader actually, what can they do with this information? Because I think so many of the productivity books are on one side where they're so prescriptive. And then, there's no room for your own nuance to it. Or on the other side, there's these woo-woo books that are, make a vision board, manifest it to the universe, and then just don't do anything and hope that it comes true. Mm-hmm. And so this book really brings it together in a unique way where it's more of a menu of saying, I think you're smart enough as a reader to take what I'm saying, do some experiments, apply it to your life, and then shift and change over time instead of just having this industrialist way of giving you a prescription. It's more of a menu. So we start in the first part of looking at your internal inclinations. And so there's an internal inclination quiz that you take that shows you with the 3 top inclinations where you're at with those. And this isn't pass fail. This is looking at internally where you at with these things that top performers typically have intuitively. Then we move into the next section, which is all around slowing down. So we started internally. Now we've looked externally, but still personally, to your slowing down. Because the research shows that when we slow down, when we're not maxed out and stressed out, that's actually when our productivity and our creativity goes up. We've seen it over and over, whether it's the Iceland study with the 4-day work week or other studies that are emerging, that the 4-day work week, when we slow down and when we slow down correctly, we actually can do better work. And so even things like, maybe you shouldn't check your email after your kid's in bed. Maybe you shouldn't work as hard on a Friday. Maybe you should rein in some of those hard and soft boundaries. And then the last part is when you are ready to kill it, how do you do that? How do you use the neuroscience to actually inform the way that you work so you get more done?
Yeah, I love that. And what's, one of the things that folks have heard from me on this podcast a lot is one of the things that one of the tools that I use is the Michael Hyatt Full Focus Planner. And the thing I like about it is that it is not digital. It's just longhand. And I think that one of the things it does is it forces me to slow down, to really think about things and process stuff in a different way, because most of us are on our phones all day and we're, texting and doing all kinds of stuff all day. And I think it does kind of get us out of sync. And I think too, one of the things that I've kind of gleaned from you, Joe, and through the book as well, is looking at your, as you talked about earlier, just your body rhythms and stuff. And I know that if I'm going to do something productive, that is something that I really need to buckle down on and really, kill it, as we like to say, I best do that in the mornings rather than wait till the afternoons when I get that kind of afternoon slump and that kind of thing. And so I think that's just really, really important. And the good news is we can all build our schedule just around those rhythms.
Yeah, when you start to look at your neurosyncing and pairing that with how you work, and then also adding in your sprint type, similar to a personality type, your sprint type, it then allows you to actually pair your way of working with the way that your brain works. And so you get more done. So even looking at, as I wrote Thursday is the new Friday, I used the neuroscience I was learning to apply it to my writing. And so being able to protect my brain in the morning. So I wasn't checking my texts. I wasn't reading the news or checking email before I'd go into my writing. I had very clear systems to let my family know, hey, I'm about to go write. I'm going to give you hugs. Daddy's going to work. I'm in the same house, but like, don't come and bust in here. I'm going into monk cave mode, having, making sure I have good nutrients in my body. So having a healthy breakfast and having my green tea and, often a green smoothie, but then even creating my environment in a different way to trigger that flow state. So I had different lighting in my office. I moved my writing chair to a different spot in the office. I had particular headphones that I wore only when I was writing, with a playlist that I only listened to when I was writing. So from every level of what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, what I'm feeling, where I'm physically in the room is saying, you are in writing mode right now. And over time, your brain then starts to say, okay, I'm going to jump right back in so much faster. I didn't have that kind of like startup that takes, half an hour to 40 minutes. It was, I'm right back where I was last Thursday. So then you're getting more done during that short period of time. And the sprints that you're doing, you can actually do more in that period of time.
Right. Yeah. And you're exactly right. And that's one of the things that I have learned so much from Joe around, is just being able to learn how to concentrate my time more. So what advice do you give to the folks like myself that tend to procrastinate or just get distracted by shiny objects and such?
I mean, I think one mindset is that every minute that you are kind of dinking around and focusing on things that aren't the highest things for whatever your business is, that's time you're stealing from your family, your friends, and yourself. And so when I think about it that way, when I think about my two daughters, if I spend half an hour just roaming the internet or doing something that isn't the single best use of my time, that's half an hour that I could be playing with glitter and Barbies or playing Mario Kart or whatever the thing is that we're doing as a family. And so I think starting with that you are stealing time from the people you love the most. So starting with that. And then saying, oftentimes it's a lack of planning. My day is so sketched out when I'm working. I don't have time to go onto the internet and just, go after shiny objects. Almost every minute of my day, even my to-do list, my assistant is putting in there, you have half an hour here. Here's the 5 emails you need to check. You need to make sure that you set up these PayPal links. You need to make sure that you pay these bills. You need to renew these things, whatever the things are. Every single minute of my day pretty much is scheduled out when I'm working. And so I haven't made time for me to go after shiny objects because I'm just too busy. And so being able to say, what is the highest use of my time? So today for me, it's podcast interviews for my podcast or to be on people's podcasts, doing a couple pre-consulting calls. So having calls with people that want to do consulting with me. How do I then set up those consulting calls so that by the time I'm talking to them, they're most likely to say yes? Well, if you work backward, they meet with Jess, they go over all of their questions. By the time they talk to me, they pretty much know the price I'm going to say. They pretty much know the advice I'm going to say. It's a final kind of check off more than anything. So today, those 2 pre-consulting calls both said yes. They said, yep, I'll sign up for this expensive consulting, because they already knew the value of it. And so then I'm making sure that even when I have to show up for individual work, that I am best primed to get the answer that I want, that they are best primed, or to opt out. Like maybe they know that this isn't going to be a fit for them, that they can opt out before they even talk to me. So then I'm saving time with that. And then to be able to say, well, where is there wiggle room? Well, I need to eat in a day. So if I need to eat, I need to go take that quick break, get some healthy food in my body, and then move back into it. And so making sure that you block out time to really get done what you need to get done. To me, it just doesn't even leave any room for any of that procrastination or overthinking.
Yeah. And Joe, you do it well. I really have been enamored by your ability to do that. I'm not a naturally organized person, so I have to work at that. So I know, Joe, I want to be respectful of your time, but there was something else that you mentioned that and it's slipping me now. That's my brain with the stress brain. But anyway, Joe, tell folks more about the book in terms of, they can find it most anywhere now. And just kind of the launch is coming up, I think, in the week that this podcast is coming out. So,
yeah. So the book drops on October 5th. And so you can order it wherever you get your books, from your local bookstore. You can have them pre-order it. You can do it from Amazon, wherever you get your books. It's available in audiobook, in digital, or just kind of a traditional book. If you do a bulk book buy of 5 or 10 or 25, then you get free access to our digital conference, Killing It Camp, where we have over 30 speakers, 30 hours of content all around private practice in 3 different areas of pillars of practice, growing a practice, and multiple streams of income. So you just submit your receipt over at thursdayisthenewfriday.com, and then you'll get access to that. So that's a huge bonus that we're doing. We recently had to make the decision to not do that live. But it also opens it up to a number of more people that maybe wouldn't have been able to come to the live event. But yeah, thursdayisthenewfriday.com is where you can submit your receipt, and anywhere that you get your books, just search Thursday is the New Friday.
Yes, and we'll have all of this in the show notes and show summary. Let me go back, because one of the things that I remembered what it was that I wanted you to maybe touch on here real quickly before we end is the importance of outsourcing and not trying to bootstrap and do too much yourself.
Yeah. So one of the concepts of Thursday is the New Friday is that you're giving yourself less time to do the same amount of tasks. So if you have 20 tasks in a week and you give yourself 20% less time, most likely you're going to drop the ball on some things. You're not going to do it perfect. You're not going to squeeze all of that in. And that gives you some really important data of what's important, because you're not going to do the 15 tasks that are the worst 15. You're going to do the top 15. So Gordon, you would do your therapy, you do your podcast, you'd do some research, you'd be looking at the products that you're launching. You might forget to take out the trash. You might forget to vacuum your office. You might forget to, maybe do some of the progress notes or something. And so then you say, okay, that's not as important. I need to figure out a system to do these progress notes faster. So you might, I know within Google, you use a lot of shortcuts. And so, so then that gives you information on things that you could either outsource, things that you should eliminate, things that you could automate through, say a software as a service, and being able to say, okay, these consistently are not priorities. I'm doing these other 15 things, and I'm not doing these other 5 things. What is that telling me? It's telling me this is not a great use of my time. And so there are those things that are not a great use of your time that you hate doing that still need to be done. So maybe you got to hire a bookkeeper. Maybe you need to, meet with your accountant more regularly. Maybe you need to hire a profit first professional. Like, who knows what it is? But that information on what you're ignoring is going to give you so much data, because you're going to be focusing on the single best use of your work. Now, what happens though, is when you're working on those things that only you can do, you start to multiply your success. Because, if I'm, for Monday through Thursday, doing all of these podcast interviews, I'm averaging 20 to 25 interviews a week. That's going to outpace the competition. That's hard to keep up with, because I'm focusing in so strongly on just the things that I can do. And sure, there's some emails that maybe are getting dropped, but that's why I have an assistant that's checking my emails, and she's trying to keep up with that. And, at the end of this book tour, I'll go back and there's some cleanup that I'm going to have to do. But I know that for 2 months, doing as many podcasts as possible, as many media appearances, will help in this area that helps multiply my success in a way that's different from just keeping up with my email.
Right. I love it. Be sure and check it out. Thursdayisthenewfriday.com. And we've got links here in the show notes. Be sure and check out Practice of the Practice too, because that's a great resource. Practiceofthepractice.com. And Joe, thanks again for being on the podcast. And I know we'll be talking again here real soon. Big thanks to Joe for joining me on the podcast. And I'm just always thrilled to have a conversation with Joe. We got to hang out at the podcast movement, and he's just always a delight to listen to. And I always tease Joe and say, he's who I want to be when I grow up, if that ever happens. But no, Joe is a wonderful person, and be sure and check out his book. And I would really encourage you to buy it. And you can find out more about it, on Amazon.com, and there'll be links here in the in the show notes and the show summary for that. But also you can just simply go to joesanok.com or practiceofthepractice.com and find out more about the book and how you can get it. I've read a big part of it, and it really is a wonderful book, and it's really well thought out and really laid out well, of really thinking about how we spend our time and how we organize our work week and just our mindset around all of that. So be sure and check it out. And also be sure and check out our sponsors for the podcast, Blueprint Health and also TherapyNotes. And they are two wonderful products that I can highly recommend. Blueprint Health will give you a way to really up your clinical game by giving you measurement-based outcomes and being able to have a platform that does that easily and seamlessly. And also TherapyNotes, or if you'll go to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. They are the leading electronic health record system for mental health providers. They are who I use in my practice and absolutely couldn't do without them. So be sure and check out both those sponsors by going to the links here in the show notes and show summary. And I'm looking forward to you hearing from my future episodes. Got a lot of great guests coming up, and just excited about the podcast. And also we've got episode 200 coming up, and you're going to get to hear from a pretty special person from here at the Practice of Therapy, and that is my wonderful virtual assistant, Rachel Bond. And Rachel has done so many things to help me out over the years and behind the scenes. And so we're going to kind of pull back the curtain, as they say, to kind of give you some things about behind the scenes here, and also just get to hear all the other wonderful things that Rachel is doing and the nonprofit company that she started. So looking forward to you hearing from that episode. So anyway, take care, folks. Thanks again for joining me for the podcast. Do take time to follow us wherever you might be listening to the podcast, whether it be on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Stitcher or Amazon Music or Audible or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Be sure and follow us there and leave us a review. I love getting honest feedback about the podcast and love hearing from you. So take care, folks, and I hope you have a great rest of your week or weekend whenever you might be listening to this. Been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. And if you haven't done so already, please sign up to receive the free private practice startup guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.